where the Crawdads Sing tells the harrowing story of Catherine Daniel Clark, Kia, and her will to survive in the marshes along the North Carolina coast. With poetic prose, the author, Delia Owens, details the natural world and wildlife and the ways in which all creatures learn to love and communicate. Abandoned. When Kia was just 6 years old, her mother, Ma, walked out of the tiny shack Kia shared with her 4 siblings and parents, and Ma never came back. Kia's father, Pa, was an abusive alcoholic, and over the next weeks, he would drive away all of Kia's older siblings, including her beloved brother and mentor Jody. Kia didn't understand what made everyone leave or why they didn't take her with them. Even though Pa was mean, he was all she had left, and she was desperate to make him stay. She took over the household duties, cleaning, doing the laundry, and cooking. For a few months, things were good for Kia and Pa. He appreciated how hard she worked to make a nice home, drank less often, and stayed home more. Kia was sure things would be different when her mother decided to return. But after a letter arrived in her mother's handwriting, Pa turned back into the drunk monster he was. He stayed away from home more and more, until one day he never came back. Kia was on her own. A little help from friends. Kia only attended 1 day of school in her life. Whenever the truant officer came looking for her, she hid in the woods behind her shack. Without Pa, Kia had no money or food. She started digging for mussels before dawn and sold them to Jumpin, an old black man who owned a gas and supply store on a wharf near her marsh. Jumpin bought Kia's mussels and continued to do so over the years. He and his wife, Mabel, also collected clothes, toiletries, and shoes for Kia from members of their church. A deep bond formed as the couple began to care for Kia as one of their own. With Jumpin and Mabel's help, Kia was able to survive her childhood alone in the marsh. She grew into a natural navigator and expert of marsh life, collecting various specimens, such as feathers, bones, nests, and shells. She used an old guidebook to identify the species of each and placed each item next to paintings she made. She didn't know their names, however, because she still couldn't read. When Kia was 14, she found a feather stuck in a stump. She suspected it had come from a boy she'd seen running by a few moments before. The feather was rare, and the next day there was another. A game proceeded, with each leaving feathers for the other, until one day, Kia finally met the boy. His name was Tate, and he'd been an old friend of Jody's. Tate and Kia grew close quickly. He taught her to read, count, and connect with someone without fear. He was the first person since her family left that Kia let into her heart, and they fell in love. Tate visited her marsh whenever he could, and their bond grew deeper. A year later, Kia was crushed when Tate left for college. He promised to come back for her, but he never did. Once again, she'd been abandoned by someone she loved, and loneliness swallowed her up. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Kia was ostracized by the townspeople of Barkley Cove. Everyone held a low opinion about people from the marsh, and rumors about the crazy marsh girl were common. Sometimes, Kia would see kids her age playing on one of the beaches between her marsh and town, and she'd watch, wishing she could be with them. One of these kids was a boy named Chase Andrews, the star quarterback for the local high school. When Kia was 19, Chase caught her hiding behind a tree watching him and his friends. He smiled, and that small connection stirred something inside of her. When Chase asked her to go out, Kia apprehensively said yes. Tate had never returned, and she was afraid of letting someone in again, but her body longed to be touched. However, when Chase became aggressive on their first date, Kia pushed him off and ran away. He apologized and said it would never happen again. She decided to give him another shot. Chase kept his promise about physical intimacy, having become enchanted by the strange, beautiful marsh girl, and he and Kia dated for over a year. But his life in town was separate, and although Kia didn't realize it, Chase was dating other women and bragging about their escapades to his friends. Toward the end of the first year, Chase asked Kia to join him on a weekend away. He'd been talking of marriage lately, and she didn't want to lose whatever connection they had. She agreed to go with him and understood that it was time to give him her virginity. Everything changed after Chase finally slept with Kia. His visits became more sporadic, but he continued to talk of marriage and building her a house. Kia floated along with this dream, believing she'd finally have a family. Then, she saw an announcement in the local paper about Chase's engagement to another woman and fell apart. She vowed never to let anyone in again. Trouble ahead. One day, after not seeing Kia for several years, Tate came back and tried to win Kia's forgiveness. Tate had reasoned that Kia would never belong in his new academic world, but he hadn't had the courage to break up with her. He'd just disappeared. But after realizing he loved her more than anyone he'd met at college, he decided the rest of it didn't matter. He wanted her back. He apologized to Kia for leaving her and said he still loved her. Kia wanted to believe him, but she knew she would never trust him again. Still, they became friends, and Tate helped Kia publish a book based on her meticulous collection of marsh specimens, which now were organized like a university research lab. With the money from the book, Kia was able to renovate the shack and stop digging for mussels. 3 years after Kia broke up with Chase, he attacked her when he found her alone in a cove down the shore from her marsh. He wanted to prove she was his and that he could have her whenever he wanted. Kia was able to escape, but not without being bruised and bloody from the attempted sexual assault. She hid her injuries from Tate and Jumpin for as long as she could, but even after they found out, there was nothing to do. No one would believe the marsh girl over Chase Andrews. Kia's fears that Chase would come after her again were appeased when his body was found underneath an old fire tower in a swamp on the other side of Barkley Cove. The town sheriff and deputy investigated the scene and found no evidence, not even Chase's fingerprints or footprints. They decided Chase had been pushed from the tower and the crime cleaned up. The town was up in arms about the local hero's death, and many pointed a finger at the marsh girl. They'd heard rumors about her and Chase and assumed she was a woman scorned. There was also a question about a missing shell necklace that Kia had given him, which Chase always wore. The most damning evidence was red fibers on the body that matched a red hat found at Kia's shack. Kia was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The fight for life. The death penalty was on the line as Kia's case went to trial. Kia had a good alibi for the night Chase died. She'd gone to a nearby town to meet her book editor and hadn't returned until after he was dead. But the sheriff was eager to pin the murder on her, and the prosecution claimed there was time for Kia to travel back and forth between towns and commit the murder. Several witnesses came forward and testified to seeing Kia in the area. It didn't look good for her. Kia's defense attorney was a local retired man who took her case pro bono. He'd grown up hearing the terrible things people said about the marsh girl and knew she would face severe prejudice. He found people to support Kia's alibi and ripped apart the prosecution's case. The trial went on for days, with Tate, Jumpin, and Mabel supporting Kia through the whole thing. Kia languished in prison, afraid she'd never be able to be back on her land. So when a verdict of not guilty was announced, Kia rushed back home and never left her marsh again. Tate and Kia came back together after the trial and lived the rest of their lives together on the marsh. When Kia was 64, Tate found her lying in her boat in one of their lagoons. She had passed away peacefully. The whole community showed up for Kia's funeral. They'd felt ashamed for how they'd treated her and for condemning her during the trial. She was now a renowned expert of marsh life and author of 7 books. When the mourners left, Tate noticed a hidden compartment under the kitchen floor. Inside, he found Chase's shell necklace. He realized everything the prosecution said was actually true. Tate put the shell back into the sea, hiding Kia's secret forever.